I'm Katie.
I'm Vinny, and this is Learn Real Good.
Real scientists keeping it real.
You like that tagline?
It's hip, it's factual, it's us.
If you say so.
Okay. This is our first recording.
Yeah, we're just starting. Thanks so much for listening.
Oh, no problem. Well, I felt obligated to be here.
Yeah, well, it's part of your podcast, isn't it?
Oh, right. Oh, you mean the listeners?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Thank you for being so brave, sticking it out with us for the first 30 seconds. We're only just beginning. It's going to get better.
So let's talk a little bit about this podcast. What's going on?
Yeah, so Learn Real Good was an idea we had. You know, there's in case, you know, you're listening to this in the future, there was this pandemic, you probably heard of it, started in 2019, lasted all of 2020. We're midway through 2021. Here we are, COVID times. And we're like, hey, we should start a podcast. You know, what a novel idea. There's only about 4 out there.
Yeah, I think this is the 5th podcast.
But what got us excited was the fact that, well, we're both really passionate about learning. We're both very curious. Mm-hmm. And we have science backgrounds and comedy backgrounds. And we love just chit-chatting and learning from each other, from others. We're like, hey, that's an idea for a podcast.
You got yourself a stew right there.
And I feel like there's a gap. I mean, I know, yes, there are a lot of podcasts.
There are a lot of podcasts, yeah.
But I feel like there's room for this.
I don't know if there's a lot of research-oriented science, psychom podcasts out there.
Certainly not ones that seek to talk to grad students. That's sort of my focus here is I want to talk to the students. There's so many outlets for professors and more seasoned researchers. But what about the junior folk who, you know, may be more passionate about psychom and want that exposure for their work?
And oftentimes in the media, you only hear from scientists or researchers when there's something like exciting happening, and only the big, sexy headlines get the journalists to go, hey, I need to talk to a scientist.
Yeah.
But there's so much great science going on that just gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, I always find, like, especially when you talk to students, when they're thinking about what careers they want, if they're students who are in the sciences, they're always like, you know, doctor. Because people who are outside of academia and the research world, I think, poorly understand what that life is like and what those careers are like.
Science is a tough road to go. It's not easy. There's a lot of time alone. There's a lot of time where you feel like the large society doesn't really pay attention to what you're doing, even though you yourself are passionate about it and your immediate circle is passionate about it. And it's difficult, academia.
What can you say? We got out. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves, folks.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the idea of the show. But what is the podcast going to be like in the future?
So our plan is to invite guests who are scientists, who are doing research. They're grad students who are actively doing research, and it's not finished. They're looking into the world around them and asking questions. No, is that not right?
You just seem really anxious.
It's not finished. Why haven't they finished it?
I like the idea of us having a guest, you finding out they just handed in their thesis, and you're like, get out.
Too late.
I want unfinished work.
You know too much. You have a conclusion? Get out.
That's a policy of ours. No conclusions. Just speculation.
only hypotheses.
Yes.
That should have been the name. Hypotheses only.
Should it?
No.
Yeah. Go on. So we're going to have guests who are grad students who may or may not, let's open it up, completed their research.
Maybe they've completed their research. But we want to talk to them about their research, about how they got into their field, and get to know them as people and researchers to learn all about the science that they're looking into and what motivates someone to look into it.
I feel like parents are going to benefit. Parents of grad students will benefit from this experience because as a science grad student, trying to explain to my family what I did was always very challenging. They'd be like, are you done that paper?
Right. It's like a paper that has to be handed in for school.
The past 5 years, I've been working on this one paper. I just
it's worth
can't
12
get it.
marks.
Yes. Yeah, it's like when you're a grad student in the sciences, you're a project manager. You are a
Yes.
scientist, of course. You're a statistician. You're a construction worker,
Yes.
a project manager, a boss.
An accountant. You have to
Yeah.
it's so many skills that go into it.
Yeah, and an artist. Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
crazy things you have to do.
So that's what we want to do. We want to talk to scientists, learn about them, and meet them, and have a good time doing it. We want to make it accessible and a good time. Like, there's no reason that science has to be so dry and boring. Like, science, we're fascinated by science. And I think our goal is to share that excitement about science with the general public.
And the narratives behind discoveries, even the little ones, like how there's so many discoveries that happen, big and small, that are accidents. And I think that's
Yeah.
really cool to hear how these things, how you come up with an idea and what inspires you, and things that go wrong but are gifts in the end, or maybe aren't.
Right.
Maybe they were just a mistake.
Maybe they're just a costly error.
Yes, made lots of those.
Yeah. And so this episode, we're going to talk to each other.
Oh,
We're going to interview each other about our science backgrounds.
I cannot wait. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I feel like Katie Couric.
You're the other famous Katie.
After this episode, number 2, Katie.
Her?
Me.
No, you're number 1, Katie.
Oh, wow.
You've already been promoted.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Couric.
Yeah.
I knew I'd take you down.
Yeah, where's your podcast, Katie Couric?
She may have one.
She probably has 3.
In any case, so who's first? Do you want to be interviewed or interview?
Interview me. Yeah,
Oh.
start with me.
My gosh.
Let's go.
Vinny Francois. Well, why don't you begin by describing your science background?
Sure.
Sort of what was your degree, where you did it if you want, and
Yeah.
sort of the vague topic, and then I will dig into that nut.
Good luck. All right. So my background, I have a master's in physics from McGill here in Montreal, where I grew up. And I was always fascinated by things that were very large out in space and things that are very small in the subatomic world. And I found out at McGill they did an astroparticle program, which is particle physics from space, which married my two interests perfectly. And so I was part of a ground-based gamma ray telescope project called STACEE, STACEE. And and I finished in 2000 was when I got my master's degree.
Wow.
So yeah, that was part of my research.
So before we get into your project, tell me what was it about space?
Oh.
I mean, I think it's inspirational to a lot. Like, kids are into
Sure.
space and dinosaurs.
Yes. And I never lost my fascination with space. I remember very specifically a National Geographic book called Our Universe, and it had full color pictures and it had like chapters on each planet, and I was super fascinated by it. And as I got older, I just got fascinated with the space program and the shuttles, and then the International Space Station was going up, and just generally fascinated with space and like what the heck is out there. And so I wanted to get some answers to those questions.
Did you ever want to be an astronaut?
Vaguely, yes, yes. I never quite ended up applying. Like every so often, the Canadian Space Agency would send out like, "Hey, come apply," and I never really applied, unfortunately. But that's fine. It just seems like a lot. It seems like a lot of headache. No, it seems like a tough gig.
It's a lot of training.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you could have been. You would have been
Oh, maybe.
a brilliant astronaut.
Maybe I would have been a terrible astronaut.
You ate all the astronaut ice cream.
I would eat all the astronaut ice cream for sure. Where's all our supplies? I ate them.
We did get to try some in Houston.
It's not good.
It's not. It's
just-
disappointing.
Well, I mean, the regular ice cream is one of the best foods humanity has ever made.
Mm-hmm.
And space ice cream is absolutely not that.
It isn't. It's like, just call it a marshmallow and end it.
Like a dry, desiccated marshmallow.
Like a Lucky Charms marshmallow.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I would not eat a large brick of that.
Having said that, Lucky Charms, if you're out there, if you want to sponsor a podcast, we will eat those bricks. Vinny, so let's get into your project. Now, we haven't described to our listeners, but we know each other pretty well.
Yes.
We've known each other for like 8 years, and you have described your project to me several times.
Sure. Do you remember it?
particles from space.
Correct.
And you did, I believe it was focused on a method of detecting some of those space particles.
Uh-huh.
And nano, teeny, quantum. I'm just trying to say physicsy sounding things. No, because it's really over my head. I do love physics. I find it fascinating. You say
it's
these words.
a very niche field. What my thesis was in.
Okay, so why don't you describe the field a little bit, and then maybe the need, and then we'll get into what you did. How's that sound?
Absolutely.
So field.
The field is space observation. So you generally stick a telescope somewhere in space or on the ground, and you look up at the sky, and it can take pictures and collect light. Some of them are radio telescopes, like the big famous one in Arecibo that recently collapsed. It was featured in the GoldenEye James Bond movie.
Is it the one from Contact?
It's also the one from Contact.
Love that movie.
It's a very famous telescope. It's huge. It looks great on film. Unfortunately, funding to support it ran out, and it recently just collapsed under its own weight.
That's kind of shocking.
Well,
Isn't it like the only one of its size?
Of that size, yeah. But there are other radio. Now, there's different techniques. You don't need to make them that big anymore. Although it's still a loss to the community.
Never forget.
So, the telescopes are good for looking at the sky.
Thanks for putting things on my level, Vinny.
And one of the things that you can do is point like a mirror at the sky and collect it in through a lens, and it goes into your eyeball, and that's just like an optical telescope that people buy and take pictures with and whatnot. So other things come through the atmosphere other than visible light. Radio waves also come through the atmosphere. The atmosphere is pretty much impermeable to other radiation. So like X-rays, gamma rays, they bounce off the Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere, the magnetic field around the Earth. So if you want to look at the sky at certain wavelengths of radiation, you either have to put a telescope up in space, or you do indirect telescope looking observations. And so the field that I was looking at is gamma ray observing and gamma ray astronomy. And there are sources of gamma rays all through the sky. Generally, they are old supernovas. And the core of an old supernova, which is an exploded star, will emit gamma ray. It'll emit visible and radio and all of these other rays. But gamma ray is a field of the spectrum, like one range of wavelengths that is not super well understood because we live on Earth and most of it's blocked out by the yourself. It's blocked out by the atmosphere.
So why use that then? If it's blocked
by the atmosphere?
Yeah.
Why?
Is it a dumb thing to choose to measure if it's difficult?
But we don't know what it is. We don't know what's out there. It's not understood because we are under this blanket of the Earth's atmosphere. But
we're here to end the atmosphere.
Yeah. You have two options. One, remove the Earth's atmosphere.
On it.
Generally frowned upon.
Oh.
Unless, I guess, you're in the oil industry. Two.
Is that their goal? It's all about gammas.
Yeah. They're just big gamma ray astronomy fans. The other option is the gamma rays, when they hit the atmosphere, they interact with the particles in the atmosphere, and they slow down and then cause a cascade of energy to fall down to the ground. So it's like shooting a bullet into a block of wood. That bullet slows down, but it pushes all the wood apart, and all that energy from the bullet traveling gets transferred into the wood, and it heats up and it deforms the wood and all that stuff, makes a loud noise. So that energy of velocity gets transformed into other forms. So that's what happens with gamma rays when they hit the Earth's atmosphere. A cascade of particles are created. It's so energetic. A cascade of particles are generated, electrons that are traveling very fast, and those fast electrons radiate. So it's like when you heat up your oven top, it gets red, it glows red. These electrons, they glow in a certain way when they come out of the gamma ray. And so you can look for this glow on the ground. And so if you see the specific glow, then you know you found a gamma ray.
Have you ever found one? Like a 4-leaf clover?
I mean, you can find them all the time because there's lots of gamma rays hitting the Earth. You just have to look in the right direction.
Okay. So we use gamma rays to measure supernovas?
No, just we want to see how much energy in the gamma ray region that a supernova would be putting out.
Okay.
And you just want to know if you look at the sky, you see stars, right? Those are points of bright light.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks different if you put a filter of visual light, like you block all the visual light, and then you only look for gamma rays. And it's like, oh, this is much brighter in the gamma ray spectrum than in the visual spectrum. And so now you can see new objects out there.
So were you like into gamma rays, or was this a
No.
subject that was sort of handed to you?
Yeah, that
Okay.
specifically gamma rays was not my desired passion.
Just posters.
Yeah, just had a
gamma rays
picture of a
and
gamma.
bathing suits on your walls.
That would be freaky.
It would. I have more questions for you. Okay, so what did you do then?
So
You found a gamma ray.
So we found some gamma rays. So we had this ground-based telescope that would look for these, and it's not just that it would glow in a specific. It was a specific frequency of light, but it would also land in rings on the ground. So kind of like a shock wave, like when you go through the sound barrier, an airplane has like a cone of air that is pushing, and it collapses and you get a sonic boom. Well, light can do that too. So a particle traveling really fast can build up this cone of light called Cherenkov radiation, and it lands as a ring. Depending on, are you familiar with conic sections?
I think you know the answer to that.
The answer is no. That might be a bit above the general aim of this podcast. But if you take a cone and you slice it like horizontally, you get a circle. But if you slice it at an angle, you get an ellipse. And so these cones would land on the ground, and you can tell by the shape of the ellipse or the circle, the angle from where the origin of the cone is, the point of the cone. And so you can work backwards from the shape of the ring on the ground to where the source of light is coming from. And it happens in a very specific wavelength and a very specific pattern, and that's how you detect it. And so we would have a series of mirrors on the ground that all point, each mirror represented a point on the ground. And then you had a detector above that mirror that would be like detecting whether that mirror was receiving light. And so then if each detector went off, you can tell which mirrors went off, and you can draw a shape of whether it was a circle or an ellipse, and then work backwards to see where in the sky that was coming from.
I've got a big question for you. Why? Why was this important to do?
Mostly because the sky has been analyzed to death, right? So we've been pointing visual telescopes at the sky for years. And so we know all of the energy that's coming out of the universe in the visual spectrum. We know
Whoa. Stop the presses. We know
right.
all the energy.
We got it on lock. Like there's a whole list.
I don't remember seeing that extra in the newspapers.
But the visual sky is so well known. It's so well studied for literal centuries that, we're still figuring stuff out. But in general, it's very hard to find new sources of visible light in the sky. Radio, because it comes through, we've been studying that for you. But all of the stuff that's in a certain range of energies, we don't know what's out there. If there's a star that only transmits gamma radiation, we wouldn't know it unless you went to look for it. Right? You wouldn't see it. You wouldn't pick it up on the radio.
All right, I'll fund your gamma detector.
Thank you, finally.
So, Vinny, are you still studying gamma rays in bathing suits?
No.
What have you moved on to scientifically?
Nothing. I don't do science anymore.
Well, that's what I was building
right,
at.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so my thesis in the end was a part of that telescope, and it was about how to measure the detector using an uncalibrated light source. So you would want to know how it worked. Yeah. Basically, you want to know how much light is going in so that you can see how much signal comes out. So that when the signal comes out, you can tell how much light went in initially. So that was my thesis, figuring out how much light would go into the detector.
Cool. Did you do it? Was it a success?
Yeah. I figured out a way of doing it.
Well, I'm afraid you can't be on this podcast. No conclusions.
Well, I'm a host, so.
Oh,
loophole.
So what do you do now, Vinny?
So now I teach improv as a natural follow-up.
What?
Yes. It was always a hobby, even back in those days. I was part of the McGill University Improv Club, and basically I just wanted to goof around as a hobby, and then it just slowly took over more of my life, and
As improv often does.
it can. And then I helped co-found the Montreal Improv Theater. And then during the pandemic, I switched over to running Improv College, an online-only improv school.
That was delightful, Vinny. You were a fantastic guest. Physics misses you. It really does.
That's what I've heard. All right, so let's talk about you.
Oh my, I don't
Here we
like
go.
that shift in focus.
Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to talk about both? Your both grads? Because you did a master's and a PhD.
Well, how about this? I'll sort of I'll just give like a tagline of my 3 projects, and you can tell me which one whatever interests you. Cool. So yes, I am Katie Pagnucco. I did a Bachelor of Science at Western University. I did my master's. I'll describe that project first, because that's a cool project too. We just saw a bird egg today, which reminded me of my honors thesis project, where I looked at nest parasitism and how brown-headed cowbirds nest parasitized song sparrows, and how the host bird babies would change their song to sound like the parasite in order to get more food.
What is nest parasitism?
So several species of birds have this really cool behavior where they have evolved to not build a nest, and instead they will lay their egg in the nest of a host bird.
Oh, like a cuckoo. That's like
a cuckoo
commonly...
is exactly great.
No.
Yeah. And so brown-headed cowbird's just another one. And so yeah, they kick out a host egg. They lay their egg.
They have to kick the other one out?
Because the mother, so the host species will often, so birds are, I'm sorry, they can be a little dumb, but if
Bird-brained, we say.
That's right. Thank you, physicist. Yes. So what if the host bird comes back and they see 4 eggs when they left and there was 3? They will know that.
So birds can do some simple arithmetic. I
guess so. There's your next project.
I'm not interested
math.
in that project.
Yeah, but what's really funny is once the host the parasite's egg hatches, it very quickly outgrows the host, and yet the parent birds just keep feeding them all, and because they're really large, these parasite birds, they are louder and bigger, and they provide a stronger signal of hunger, and they therefore get a lot of food from the parents, and it can actually cause a really steep decline in the parents' health because of all the food that they're bringing all the time. It's exhausting work.
Wow, being a parent is tough.
Yeah, so what we found was, what my supervisor had previously found was that host nestlings actually surprisingly did better when there was a parasite in the nest, and asked why are they gained more weight in the presence of one of these parasites. And so my honors thesis project, I listened to calls and looked at their shapes, like what they looked like sonically, and found that they changed the sound of their call to be louder and to sound more like the parasite in order to get presumably fed more.
Squeaky wheel.
Exactly. That's what I should have called that paper. For my master's, I did that in the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And that was a project looking at state-of-the-art under-road tunnels at preserving a salamander population, which was in decline. So that salamanders, the salamander species we looked at anyway, overwintered in like abandoned mammal burrows.
So, overwinter?
So like during winter, like overwinter.
Oh, over the winter. Okay, I see. Now I get it.
Yeah. So it's
it sounds like overwinter. Double winter.
Super winter.
Yeah.
So they would just like be, sleepy in there and sleep the winter away. And then in spring, they would come out of those little tunnels and they would go to their aquatic breeding ground to make bebes. And these guys, this population of interest, would have to cross a road.
Oh.
And it was noticed a lot of them were being hit and killed on the road, and their population seemed to be declining.
Oh.
And so this is in Waterton Lakes National Park. They installed the first ever under-road tunnels for an amphibian population in Canada. It was a big deal.
Congratulations.
And it was my job to sort of do some infrastructure to encourage use of the tunnels by the salamander to see if it seemed as though
So
they
you
were
had, like,
using them.
blinking lights and sexy
Disco
salamander
balls.
signs. Yeah.
Yeah. Bikini posters of salamanders.
Why
Yeah.
did so many bikini posters?
I don't know. I had to install big fences. So basically there were 4 tunnels along a road that was 1 kilometer long. And these are tiny itty bitty salamanders. They're not going to know like, oh, there's a tunnel, you know,
Right.
the equivalent of like 1,000,000 miles
Yeah,
away.
you can't put up a sign. They're not going to figure it out.
So we'd have to install these big fences, directional fences. So they're always at an angle. So it always feels they can sense that they're going towards their overwintering habitat or to their breeding habitat. Yeah. And then for my PhD, I did that at McGill. And I was looking at invasive species, particularly how round gobies, which are a fish that is invasive.
Are there other shapes of goby?
Goby has a pretty set shape, not round.
Not round.
Not round.
Except for these ones.
You know what's funny is that the French name is Goby à tache noire.
Oh, like black
Because they have a
splotches.
black spot on their fin, a prominent black spot, which helps distinguish them from other fish.
So what happened in English?
We really dropped
Yeah.
the ball.
Round.
I mean, the spot's round. Anyway, yeah, it's not a great name.
Oh, well.
I'm sorry if the person who came up with the name Round Goby, you know, I'm sorry if I insulted your naming abilities.
Well,
Maybe we just miss it. I'm missing what the name.
maybe it was round spot goby, and everyone's like, ugh, I don't want to say the whole thing.
Fair enough. Yeah, so looked at how they interact with, you know, the very famous zebra and their lesser known cousin quagga mussels, and how together they can influence primary production through trophic cascades, which is one of my favorite
What's
topics.
primary production and trophic cascades?
So primary production refers to sort of your like plants would be the most obvious primary producers, things that are at the base of a food web because they are the first that turn non-organic energy into organic energy. So plants do it through photosynthesis. That's pretty obvious. You can do that through photosynthesis, chemosynthesis as well, if we're talking at the base of a hydrothermal vent. There we go. No photosynthesizers down there, but still communities.
Right.
Yeah.
And then trophic cascade, I think was the other term they used.
Yeah. So
Sounds cool, like a band. Trophic cascade.
That was one of my first bio-based bands. Yeah, so trophic cascades, I always found that fascinating when I learned it in school. So it's this phenomenon where a predator, if it's having a strong influence on a food web, typically through predation, if they eat a lot of the herbivore, right? If you have like a first tier predator that consumes herbivores, eating a lot of herbivores, that will have an indirect positive impact on your newly learned primary producers, right? So that's a trophic cascade, this idea that you can have this alternating positive negative relationships down a given food
So
chain.
you have a negative impact on the population that eats a lowered
the
item.
enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
What'd you find?
For my PhD entirely. Yeah. I mean, so a PhD it's not one project, right? So I had 4 different chapters doing very different things. That's sort of trying to describe it all together in one tidy topic. So sure. I had one chapter was just looking at impacts of invaders versus native species and sort of looking at past studies, doing what's called like a meta-analysis to get some overall patterns in the literature. I had a chapter looking at gobies versus native fish similarly and how they affect trophic cascades. I did a field study where I scuba dived through the St. Lawrence River.
That was the whole chapter? Just
Yep.
me scuba diving through the chapter.
I mean,
just
that
like
was
luxury videos.
Because it is quite luxurious scuba diving in the St. Lawrence River, looking at goby populations and their effects on benthic invertebrates. So
what's a benthic invertebrate?
Benthic refers to living on the bottom, and invertebrate like.
So if you have like a basement apartment.
So like insect babies often, right? Insect babies live on the bottom of the water. And so I was looking at numbers of them. Well, not all of them do, but a lot of them do, yeah.
Insect babies live at the bottom of the water?
Right. So lots of flies, lots of insects will lay their eggs in aquatic habitats.
Oh.
Like mosquitoes.
What about like beetles?
And caddis flies. There's water beetles, but not all beetles are aquatic.
Oh. Wow. I never knew that.
Mayflies.
At the bottom of the water.
Well, yes. Well, in the water, yes.
Whoa.
Often at the bottom. Yeah, they
But
crawl
like
around.
bees don't do that.
No.
They have hives. That's what I know.
Nailed it. But they're They're a big food base for a lot of predators that live in the water. Like, well, little fish will eat those and then bigger fish will eat the fish.
I've seen that book.
And then I had a cool chapter where we were looking at crayfish and omnivorous versus predator crayfish and their influences on trophic cascades. But what's cool about that project is that all crayfish are sort of omnivorous. And so what we did to make them predators was we actually did surgery on them to remove the mouth parts that allowed them to graze the plants, basically, so that they were forced to be predators.
So they couldn't eat herbs anymore.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yes. The things we do for science.
And did you figure, was it conclusive in any way?
That was a really tricky project to do the statistics on. There didn't seem to be an impact of, so we looked at two different factors there. We were looking at invasive crayfish and ones that have evolved here versus predators and omnivores. So we looked at both of those things, and we didn't see an impact of native versus non-native crayfish, but we did find an impact of predators versus omnivores.
Wow.
Yeah. It was pretty cool.
That is
pretty
cool.
proud of that one.
Good work.
I got to do that with my buddy Monica.
Nice work.
Monica Granados. Shout out. That's us.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Good work, Katie.
Oh, I love it. I love science. And I found along my journey, I had often been given advice to avoid doing TA work because it takes time away from your research and you can't be as productive and get as many papers. And that's such an important measure of success through grad school. And so I didn't do TA work till I did my PhD, and I loved it. I didn't expect to love it because I'd gotten a bad impression from a lot of people.
Well, what do you do now?
Yeah, so that brings me to what I do now. So I am currently a college instructor in the biology department, and I feel like I have the world's greatest job. I get to talk to brilliant young scientists who are so enthusiastic about biology and what's so cool about it, and get them excited about it, and get to see them learn. And it's a beautiful, magical thing, and I feel so lucky I get this life.
Amazing.
And I do improv. That's how we know each other.
And that's how we know each other. And full circle.
We did it.
We did it. Yeah, we both have a love of comedy and making things up. And so, yeah, I think this podcast comes out of a love of trying to make sense of the unmake sensible.
Yeah, and improv taught me a lot about, how important it is to be you, to have personality and to be sort of willing to make mistakes and to tell stories, because science is all about stories.
Yes. Any time you can present your information in the form of a narrative, the audience is going to remember it that much better. Yeah,
exactly. That's it. We did it. First episode.
Is that it? We're done?
I feel like
There's nothing left to talk about.
Yeah, we solved physics and biology.
Done. Biophysics closed.
In conclusion.
We can't have a conclusion. We're going to get kicked off the show.
I was just checking. So where do we go from here? So in the future, we're going to have guests. We're going to talk to them.
Yeah.
We've got recordings planned. They are coming out.
This is episode 0. So I look forward to episode 1.
Cannot wait.
It's a good place to start.
Yep. See you soon, folks.
Thanks for listening.
Bye, Vinny.
Bye, Katie.
Learn real good.
I'm going to cut that out.